On the 15th of March, in the year 44 BC, the most powerful man in the world walked into a room full of his friends. Within minutes, 60 of them would surround him, and 23 blades would find his body. The man was Julius Caesar, and the people who killed him were not his enemies. They were the men he had forgiven, promoted, and trusted with his life. This is the story of how the greatest rise in Roman history ended on a cold marble floor, and the timeless lesson it still teaches about power, envy, and the danger of a man who recognizes no limit. Caesar was not born a king. Rome had no kings. It had thrown out its last one almost 5 centuries earlier, and it hated the very word. He was born into an old noble family that had lost most of its money, which meant he grew up with a famous name and empty hands, surrounded by men far richer than himself. That gap between who he was and who he believed he should be would drive him for the rest of his life. He clawed his way up through the army, through dazzling speeches in the forum, and through staggering amounts of borrowed money, until he had built an alliance with the 2 most powerful men in Rome, Pompey the general and Crassus the richest man alive. Then he went to Gaul, and there he became a legend. For 8 brutal years, he conquered what is now France and Belgium. By the end, by the ancient accounts, 1 million people were dead and another 1 million sold into slavery. It made him fabulously rich. More importantly, it gave him an army of hardened soldiers who loved him more than they loved Rome. And that terrified the Senate. In the year 49 BC, they ordered him to give up his command and come home alone as a private citizen, where his enemies were waiting to destroy him. So Caesar came to a small river in northern Italy called the Rubicon. It was the legal border of his command. To cross it with his army was treason. It meant civil war against his own country. He stopped at the bank, and for a moment, the man who feared nothing hesitated. Then he spoke the words that history never forgot. The die is cast, and he crossed. What followed was a war that tore the Roman world apart. Caesar against Pompey, the friend who had once been his ally and his son-in-law. Caesar shattered Pompey's larger army at Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for safety, and was murdered on the beach the moment he stepped ashore. When they brought Caesar the severed head of his old friend, the accounts say he turned away and wept. Now, there was no one left to stop him. Caesar returned to Rome as the master of the entire world. He was named dictator, then dictator for 10 years, and finally dictator for life. He put his own face on the coins, something no living Roman had ever dared to do. Statues of him rose across the city. A month of the year was renamed in his honor, the month we still call July. And in his greatest miscalculation, he forgave his enemies. He pardoned the very men who had taken up arms against him, handed them honors and positions, and believed that his mercy would buy their loyalty. It did the opposite. It left them alive, ashamed, and quietly burning with resentment. Because to the proud, old families of Rome, there was one thing they could never forgive. Not cruelty, not war, but a single man raised so high above the rest that they all looked small beside him. Rome had sworn an oath 460 years before that it would never again bow to a king. So when a crowd in the forum offered Caesar a royal crown, and he pushed it away, not once but 3 times, many were certain it was theater, a performance, and that what he truly wanted was to wear it. A whisper began to spread through the marble halls. He means to make himself king. 60 senators joined a conspiracy to kill him, and at the very heart of it stood 2 men Caesar trusted. One was Cassius, lean, sharp, and bitter. The other was Brutus, a descendant of the very man who had expelled Rome's last king centuries before, and someone Caesar loved almost like a son. Some even whispered that Brutus was his son. Caesar had pardoned Brutus for fighting against him, lifted him up, and given him everything. The ancient writers say Caesar once looked at these pale, thin men and admitted he did not fear the fat and easygoing ones. He feared the pale and the lean. He was looking straight at the men who would kill him, and he promoted them anyway. The warnings came. A soothsayer told him plainly to beware the Ides of March, the 15th day. The night before, his wife Calpurnia woke from a nightmare in which she held his bleeding body in her arms, and she begged him not to leave the house. Caesar, uneasy, almost stayed home. But then another trusted friend, also secretly in the plot, arrived and mocked his fears, laughing that the Senate would ridicule a great man frightened by a woman's dream, and reminding him that they might offer him the crown that very day. Pride defeated instinct. Caesar went. As he walked toward the Senate, he passed a soothsayer in the crowd and smiled. "The Ides of March have come," he said, as if to prove the old man wrong. "Aye, Caesar," the soothsayer answered, "but they have not gone." Inside, the conspirators gathered around him under the cover of a petition. One man grabbed his toga, the signal, and the first dagger tore into his neck. Caesar fought back. He drove his writing stylus into one attacker's arm. But they pressed in from every side, blade after blade, 23 wounds in all. And then, through the blur of his own blood, he saw Brutus stepping forward with a knife. The accounts say that in that instant Caesar stopped struggling. He pulled his toga over his head, and by one ancient account murmured in Greek, "You too, child." Then the most powerful man in the world collapsed and died at the base of a statue. It was the statue of Pompey, the rival he himself had destroyed. The killers ran into the streets, holding their bloody knives in the air, shouting that Rome was free again. They expected the people to cheer them as heroes. Instead, they were met with silence, and then with horror. Within days, Caesar's loyal lieutenant Mark Antony stood before the crowd, read out Caesar's will, which left money to every ordinary citizen of Rome, and turned the entire city against the assassins with a single speech. Caesar had become more dangerous dead than he had ever been alive. Civil war erupted all over again. Within 2 years, Brutus and Cassius were both defeated and took their own lives. And Caesar's quiet, sickly grandnephew, a teenager named Octavian, whom Caesar had named his heir, rose out of the chaos to win everything and crowned himself Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The republic those men had murdered Caesar to save died anyway. They had not stopped a king. They had given birth to an empire. So what can a man stabbed to death 2,000 years ago teach you about power today? This: the higher you rise, the more your success frightens the people standing closest to you. And it is almost never the stranger who destroys you. It is the one you forgave, the one you promoted, the one who smiled at your table. Caesar's mercy never bought him loyalty. It bought him assassins who felt they owed him nothing but their shame. He had conquered the entire world, and still he could not see that ambition without limit manufactures its own enemies. There is a height of power that no human being is allowed to hold in peace, because the moment you become the exception to every rule, everyone beneath you begins to feel smaller. The lesson is not to stop climbing. The lesson is that power without limits, without allies who truly share in it, without the wisdom to know when you finally have enough, is the most dangerous place a person can ever stand. Caesar master de Rome. He never mastered the one thing that has killed more powerful men than any army in history: the quiet envy of those who stand just below them. The men who once ruled the world all left us the same warning, if you know how to read it. Subscribe for the lessons history try to bury. And if you want to understand how power truly works, the rules Caesar broke are written down in the 48 Laws of Power, linked below.